The following episode contains very sensitive topics. Um, if you feel uncomfortable at any point, it's okay to turn this off and skip this one. Um, and just know that no matter what you're going through, there's help out there for you. Okay? Without further ado, welcome to a very special DA Wrestling. This is the start of a three-part series that's going to be released over the next couple of days. That is going to go in depth on our thoughts on the Vince McMahon documentary that was released on Netflix last week. This will be episode 1 and 2. The next one will be 3 and 4, and then we'll finish with 5 and 6. This will be up Wednesday afternoon. The next one will be Thursday morning. The last one will be Friday morning. But before we get started, as always, I'm here with my co-host, Andrew. What's going on, man?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Let's do this thing. Let's talk about this stuff here. So in this episode, we're gonna be talking in the first two of it. We're gonna be talking about in this documentary how Vince started, how he didn't really know his old man, how it nearly got sold to Gorilla Monsoon, and not Vince, right? The lead up into how he created WrestleMania, and it'll be touching on as well as starting into how his first lawsuit that kind of occurred within the first several years of WWE's existence, really under the Vince McMahon Jr. era. That makes it very clear here. There are a lot of people in this documentary that did talk about a lot of things. In this documentary, Undertaker's in it, Bret Hart's in it, Tony Atlas had a lot of things to say, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, almost a who's who. Also, obviously, Hulk Hogan is in this one because you cannot do WrestleMania WWE without Hulk Hogan. That is just, you cannot get away from that. So you will see a lot of stuff here. But who was Vince McMahon? That's kind of the question. That was there a difference between the character Mr. McMahon and Vince? At the end of the documentary, it kind of clears like it doubles. There was no difference almost.
So that was actually what the purpose of this documentary was. Is like, where does Vince McMahon, the person, start, and the character Mr. McMahon end?
And we will be delving into this here on DA Wrestling. This is DA Wrestling on Vince McMahon's documentary, part 1 and 2. Go.
So here's the thing. Okay, right off the top,
Yeah.
Vince is like, I wish I could tell you the real stories. Holy shit.
Yeah, that kind of makes you like wonder what the heck they actually, or what he didn't tell anybody. Because as I said, at the end of it, like, who is Vince McMahon?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the character? Is it not the character? Is Vince McMahon, really just what you see on TV? Is that really him? Now, Austin had something interesting to say too, when he in episode 6, but we'll get to that shortly. But like he mentioned though that Austin himself is basically Steve turned up to about 10. But he mentioned that it's very similar to Vince. But when you look deep into it, Vince's childhood almost kind of played a role into some of the things that.
So overall,
Yeah.
after watching it, I feel like there a lot of the trauma, and it feels like it's a lot of unresolved trauma.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to put this disclaimer out there, so we don't get sued or anything.
I don't get sued.
These are just our thoughts and interpretations of what happened. I'm not insinuating anything.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to deviate from anything that wasn't discussed in the documentary.
Yeah.
That being said, I feel like when you look at how he came up, getting essentially abused by his stepdad, and he did a Playboy magazine interview in 2001 where he alluded to possible some sexual abuse as well
From
that
his
he endured.
mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I got this information from listening to Post Wrestling's breakdown of episode 1.
Yeah.
Um, but I felt overall, and we'll continue to touch on this, like I feel like once he became a character on TV, it happened the same way it happens in society where, very often those who were abused growing up uh, do have a tendency to become abusers themselves. And I feel like he kind of projected a lot of that unresolved trauma just based on some of the stories that were discussed in the documentary.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, he went on record and saying that yes, he was abused by his stepfather.
yeah,
He found the thing later on that his mother apparently abused him. He didn't know his real father though till he was about 12 years old.
right.
Right, so that's 12 years. He didn't know who his real father was.
Yep.
So that play, I mean, that plays a lot in some people's minds. Like some people there just never know their father, and some people never know anything about what's going on with their parents and family. So
Well, personally speaking, like I went from age 8 until age 17 without my father around.
mhm. Now
And
it's a I mean, it's a possibility that like Vince, yeah, Vince probably got Bob really messed up between those first 12 years for sure.
100%.
You know, now when he joined up with his father and wanted to work with his father, you know, he started off really as just a broadcaster. His father hired him as a broadcaster and started working and learn the ins and outs of the business.
Now, to provide context to that, the story goes that there was an announcer trying to strong arm Vince Sr.
Yep.
for more money, and Vince Jr. looked at his dad and he said, "Well, what are you going to do, Pops?" And he said, "You know, do you think you can do it?" And him being however old he was at the time was like, "Yeah, okay." And and he said, "Okay, screw him. You're up."
Yep. Eventually,
And even Vince admitted himself he was not very good.
no. And a lot of people
Um,
even back that up and say he wasn't very good at being an announcer. Yeah, so Vince was a bad announcer. Fair enough. But that didn't hold him from like not wanting to actually take over the company from his father. Like he wanted to take over that company from his father, and he had a lot of big ideas to it. But what I didn't know about in the documentary, which I found very interesting, was that his father, Vince Sr., was originally planning on selling that company to Gorilla Monsoon.
yeah, so that was like the first bit of information that I didn't know.
Yeah, I had no idea that even like was ever a thing.
So yeah, that was the first thing that I learned in this documentary was like kind of when Vince Jr. got there, Gorilla was the heir apparent.
Yeah, he was like legitimately the one who was going to buy the show. Can you just imagine what? Okay, slightly off topic here, but like, what if Gorilla Monsoon did buy that company? What do you think? Like, do you think the WWE would have survived? Probably.
I think I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna say that the national expansion doesn't happen,
Yeah, I think that. I think
and
it's
I
more
don't
territories.
I don't think wrestling is as global as it is today.
Well, it's a I mean, I'm not necessarily I'm not disagreeing with you on that one,
Because
but
there's a lot of things you're gonna like we're gonna discuss over the course of this documentary. Like there's a lot of things that had to go right.
yeah, for sure. And
Um,
we're leading that into later in this episode. But I do want to say, like in the next episode, next two episodes, 3 and 4, we will talk the Monday Night Wars and WCW. Is it possible though that WCW might have become what we know today as the biggest wrestling company on the planet? Is it possible if Gorilla Monsoon took over and that stuff didn't happen? I mean, it's
No,
all
no, because because
out there.
Gorilla was from that old school like
Impact.
territorial promoter. He was part of the old school. Like he was one of the guys that was against Vince's like national expansion,
Yeah,
right? Um Eventually Gorilla got on board, but
yeah,
you
which
know,
was comical. When you think
right.
about it now, like
But
he
even
literally gave him
so,
a
like
job.
so did Vince Sr. eventually. Now, I have like this is probably like the most hazy era of my wrestling knowledge is like this late territory days
Yeah,
and like so like the late 70s, early 80s into the late 80s.
yeah,
You ask me about anything from like 1990 on, I'm pretty good at it.
yeah.
But like this early stuff was very fascinating,
Oh, absolutely, it is because it.
especially to kind of transition topics here when they start talking about um who's going to lead this national expansion and transitioning from Bob Backlund as champion to what would eventually be Hulk Hogan
Yeah,
when they had offered Dusty Rhodes the spot.
yeah,
Imagine how different things are if Dusty's the guy and not Hulk Hogan.
yeah. Very true. Like,
Do you know how? Do you know what I mean now? Like
yeah, I understand what you mean by
so
that.
many
Yeah, for
things
sure.
had to go right.
Yeah, like when originally too, like Vince bought the company off his father through payments.
Four payments, and even Linda was in this documentary very
Yeah,
briefly, but Linda was in this documentary.
she's not in it a ton. She's maybe I don't know, probably maybe 5 to 10
Five
minutes
five
worth of
minutes, yeah.
total. Right, she's not really in there. Like, and she's been with
But,
Vince since 17 years old. Like they got
but
married at 17.
one of the things that she said was like they were basically playing with house money because the money they were using to pay Vince and his other stockholders, shareholders, was literally money they were generating off of live events.
Yeah,
So I guess it turned out to be like four payments of they didn't disclose the number.
yeah. The number was never disclosed in the actual documentary, but I can imagine is at that. I mean, okay, so I was born in 82.
Yeah.
So I have a good kind of a good idea roughly how much shit would cost back then. You're probably looking at what, $30,000 payments, maybe.
No, no, I think it was like
It
I
wasn't in the
heard
millions. I'll
I
tell you
heard
that
John
much.
I heard John Pollock talk about this. I believe the number was somewhere around 200 four payments of 250 grand. I think he bought it for a total of a million.
Maybe.
But again, don't quote me on that.
Yeah, like
But I
it
believe that's the
ranges.
number that was used.
It's probably, I mean,
Anyways,
depends on how they looks at. Like it's don't forget, it's also this late 70s. It's also the beginning of the 80s too.
this is around 1980. This is around late 1982 that this starts.
Yeah, so it's not exactly like back then. $1 million was literally a lot of money. It still
So
is now to a degree, but it's not as much, though, not what it was then.
so they do go into kind of like Hulk Hogan's early history.
Well, first off, before after he buys after he buys the product, he starts has the idea. He never liked the term pro wrestling. That's the first thing he said. He never liked
Yep.
the term pro wrestling. He always liked it. He looks at it as entertainment, which is
Yep.
fine, which is it totally is. But when he started going into the territories, he started buying out all the top people from the other territories, like the Gagnes and all stuff. Like he brought in Junkyard Dog. He brought in like
DiBiase. He
DiBiase.
brought in
He basically did things that like a company like WCW and AEW did to the WWE. Keep
yeah.
that in mind. It's almost very hypocritical of him.
We will go back. Listen, when
Yeah,
we
for sure.
in the next episode when we talk like Monday Night Wars,
Yeah,
like there is a actual point in episode 4, I believe, where Vince completely contradicts himself
absolutely does.
in terms of the WCW talent raid that happened in 95 or 94, 95, 96,
Yeah,
as opposed to what he did when he was expanding nationally. Because like he was taking all the top guys
absolutely was.
from the territories. Like
Yeah,
He took Savage from Memphis. He took Dusty from Florida. Um, he took Kerry Von Erich at some point. He
He
took
did.
JYD,
Yeah.
Ted DiBiase, like
He took the
all
who's
of these
who at that time.
all of these guys that, and he took Hogan from AWA as well.
Well, Hogan was an interesting one too, because now this is the thing with Hogan.
He
Now,
lies a
Bob
lot.
Backlund was the champion at that time under Vince Sr.,
Yep.
right? Vince McMahon Jr. looked at something wrestling as more of a larger than life things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so Hulk Hogan originally worked for Vince Sr. But when the role for Rocky 3 came up, because I remember that movie, that was a hell of a good movie,
Oh
right?
yeah, this
Right?
story was interesting.
Vince, right? Hulk Hogan wanted to go do, because like Vince Sr. kind of created Hulk Hogan. It was put it that way, right? So Hulk Hogan was a heel, right? Hulk Hogan wanted to go do the movie with Sylvester Stallone. Vince McMahon Sr. said, if you go do the movie, you don't have a job here. Hulk Hogan said, screw that, fine, then I'll go do the job. After he did the movie, he went back to the AWA.
Yeah.
When Vince bought the company, right, he wanted something larger than life. Hulk Hogan at the time was one of like huge, right?
Yep.
He brought back
And
Hulk Hogan,
now, correct me if I'm wrong. Rocky 3 comes out in like 1982, correct?
some of that, yeah,
Okay.
right. So Hulk Hogan, he brings back in Hulk Hogan. Now he needed to take the title off Backlund. He didn't want to do a good guy versus good guys. He was going to have Hogan as a face. Hence, bringing in the Iron Sheik. The Iron
Yep.
Sheik at the time was one of the biggest heels in pro wrestling.
Well, and so
For
that
sure.
actually started another topic of like, you know, this kind of like American patriotism, and it kind of touches on it in episode 2 as well.
They do. They talk
Like
a lot about American patriotism at that time. They talk about it throughout the time of the show too.
because especially like so the Iron Sheik not so bad, but when they bring Sheik back as what was it, Colonel Mustafa,
And
with
Iraqi
Slaughter?
sympathizer.
Yeah, with Slaughter.
Yeah, yeah, that's more around. Yeah, yeah,
And then Desert Storm happened.
yeah. And that's when it got worse for that too. But
Actually, did you know, here's something that's not discussed in the documentary, but I have learned about before.
yeah,
They had to the story goes, there's two versions of this story.
yeah,
Originally, they were going to run a stadium for WrestleMania 7 in Los Angeles.
yeah,
I believe where the Rams or the Raiders played. But they downsized to what was the Memorial Coliseum
yeah,
because of potential bomb threats, because of how hot this uh, Sergeant Slaughter Hulk Hogan thing got,
yeah,
because Desert Storm had just happened.
yeah.
Um, the other version of that is they moved because of a lack of ticket sales. But you can choose which one to believe, but
Truth is, it's probably both column A and B combined somewhere in the middle there.
sure. Um,
But Vince needed Hogan. You find out too that Vince needed Hogan. According to Meltzer, Vince needed Hogan more than anything else, because if he couldn't get Hogan over, because Iran versus Hogan, Hogan was the American hero. He liked that whole American hero, I'm the hero kind of guy against the bad guy.
yep.
When he took the title off the Iron Sheik, Hogan became the biggest thing in pro wrestling at that point in time.
So Sheik beats Backlund in, I believe, November of '82.
Yeah, where they taught the infamous towel throw.
Yeah, he beats Backlund in '82,
Yep.
and within 2 months, January 23rd, 1983, I believe is the exact date.
Yep.
Hogan beats the Iron Sheik,
Yep.
and off the back of that, you have kind of like that starts the nucleus of the national expansion.
Yeah.
there are some talking heads here that were phenomenal. Okay, like
Mhm.
Phil Mushnick
Bill
bringing in,
Belichick, who has gone on record saying he absolutely hates Vince McMahon.
but also Dave Meltzer. Like, and honestly, I mean, as much as people clown on Meltzer now in 2024, he was like the only guy really covering pro wrestling in America in the 80s.
It's true. There wasn't
Um,
much other people out there. There wasn't like you don't have what you have now if it wasn't really for Dave Meltzer. You think about it.
I look at like the big two. It's Bill Apter and Dave Meltzer.
Yeah, like you look at the whole thing. They're like, after Hogan takes the title off the Sheik, right?
Yep.
They want to expand nationally into territories and take all the going nationally, right? It's funny how WrestleMania came into play though. Vince was
Mhm.
apparently on vacation, for a little bit, a couple
He
days,
was there for two. He was in the Caribbean for 2 days.
2 days, and came up with the idea of WrestleMania on closed circuit TV,
Yep.
right? Which is actually astounding to me, right? And you wanted to take it national. So while they were promoting this WrestleMania, this whole big thing, because Vince was paying on everything on this one, like they mortgaged everything just for WrestleMania, and
Here's where the lawsuits
this is
start.
the first lawsuit happens, right? Now, one of the
Do you want to talk the Richard Belzer one first, or the infamous one with Dr. D. Davis Schultz?
well, let's do the one with the interviewer. John yeah, John, some guy named John Stefano or Stefano wanted to expose the business, having interviewed Hulk
Yeah.
Hogan.
Yep.
It's led to a wrestler taking it into his own hands. Now, Vince never actually said take him out, but it was kind of implied according to Tony Atlas.
Yeah.
And that's when the guy, I can't remember what his name was off the top of my head right now.
Dr. D. David Schultz.
Oh, David Schultz. Yeah, sorry. Ended up hitting him, apparently damaging his ear lobe, according to the interviewer. That was the first lawsuit. That was the
Yep.
first of many.
And then literally like the week of WrestleMania, Hogan and Mr. T are on Richard Belzer's show. And Richard Belzer asks Hogan to put a move on him. So Hogan gives him a front chin lock and literally chokes him out on live TV
Yeah.
and does not protect Belzer at all.
No.
And Belzer just crumbles to the ground like you ever see that fight between John Jones and Lyoto Machida?
Oh yeah. Long
Where
time.
yeah, it was like 2011 or something, but it was
Yeah.
in Toronto.
Yeah. It was a long,
And
long time. I was in Van at the time. Well, I remember watching it.
Jones submitted, he choked out Lyoto Machida with a standing guillotine, and when he let go, like Machida just crumbles, right?
I just dropped. Yeah. He was out like a
So
light.
that's essentially what Belzer does, but he falls backwards and smashes his head off the stage,
Yeah.
and you could see as he's going to get attention, like there's blood coming down the back of his
Oh yeah.
head.
And it's blatantly shown as well too. It's not like it wasn't even hidden. It was blatant.
Yeah.
So
Um. So fortunately, WrestleMania goes off without a hitch. They do touch on the Rock and Wrestling Connection as well
yeah.
on MTV and how kind of pivotal.
Yeah. And after that kind of moves into episode 2 after that, because that kind of ends with the start of everything
Yeah.
WrestleMania and how everything goes.
And
After WrestleMania, they started moving towards Saturday Night Main Event because they had that option to do that. Right? Now, back then, WWE never had guaranteed contracts. There's no such thing as guaranteed contracts back then. So leading into episode 2, they start talking about WrestleMania 2 because Vince wanted to do WrestleMania 2, a second one. But let's do it this way. Let's do a simulcast. So we'll do one in LA, New York, and I believe the other one was Chicago, right? If I'm correct.
yes.
Okay. And which they've said on record, they'll never ever do that again because it's just a pain.
Yeah, so there was a lot of technical issues.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing. So I believe it was Nassau Coliseum
Yeah, the Long Island.
in Long Island. They ran Chicago Stadium
Yeah.
because they hadn't built the United Center yet.
Yeah, that wasn't even thing. That was still the old where the old Blackhawks used to play.
Yeah. So the United Center doesn't come for another
10 years?
10 years. I believe WWE was the first one to run the United Center.
Yeah,
Um,
because when the Bulls
for
had their championships, with those 6 years of championships, they're all United Center in Chicago. So
Okay. So
probably
I believe it was a SummerSlam was the first show at
yeah,
that venue.
yeah,
Anyways, and then they did the LA Sports Memorial Coliseum.
yeah,
Uh yeah, logistically this sucked.
yeah. And they've gone on record saying they're never going to ever do that again. It was
No. Thankfully, it was enough of a commercial success where it allowed them to keep going.
we're allowed him to do WrestleMania 3 in Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit, but in between that, though, in between Star WrestleMania 2 and even number 3, Jesse Ventura tried to start a union for wrestlers.
Yeah.
Now Jesse has gone on record in recent interviews and said there's a reason why he hates Hulk Hogan.
Yep.
It's because Hogan was the one that told Vince. And Vince
And
apparently told
actually,
people that if you all go to this meeting, you will not have a job.
yeah. So, and actually, Jesse touches on this about a month and a half ago. When Jesse was on
Van
Raw.
Fleet. He was also on
Yeah,
Van
he
Fleet.
did. Yeah, okay. So he did
Yeah.
an interview with Chris Van Vliet.
Yeah.
Love his content, by the way.
We're trying to be like
And
Chris Van Fleet, folks. No.
yeah,
We're trying to be ourselves, but
no, of course. But so yeah, Jesse's talked about this very openly, and even Hogan himself just admits like,
Hogan doesn't even shy away from it at this point now. Doesn't even shy away from it. He's like, yeah, I did. Went right to Vince about it.
yeah, and apparently he phrased it. He kind of embellished a little bit, where it was like, oh, I told Vince that Jesse was just trying to stir shit up.
Yeah. No.
With this union stuff. And I think now, because of how, and they even say this in the documentary,
Yeah.
I think for how well guys are taken care of now, there will never be a union in wrestling.
No, there's more guaranteed contracts right nowadays. And you could kind of like thank
And you
WCW
can
for
thank
that.
WCW for that.
Absolutely can. There's more guaranteed contracts nowadays. 100% there is. I mean, as much as
Oh
people
no,
say,
it's not just more guaranteed. Everybody has a guaranteed contract.
yeah, but a lot of people like to say there isn't, and like that's some
Everybody
people have
has
say they don't.
So here's what I understand.
Yeah.
Everybody has what's called a downside guarantee.
Yeah.
Where whether you're working, booked, or not, you get paid a flat rate.
Yep.
You get a paycheck every 2 weeks, just like everybody else, based on your downside guarantee.
Yep.
But if you listen to Maven's channel
Yeah.
on YouTube last year,
Yep.
he broke it down where like you can be on your downside or you can be on pay sheets, which pays more, which you get a percentage of revenue or something like that.
Yeah.
And you get different payoffs for each show.
Yeah.
So that's thanks to WCW, but we'll talk more about that in the next episode.
Three and four.
Back to this though.
Yeah. So after that whole thing, Jesse basically gets blackballed for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, he ends up coming back to work with Vince as a commentator, but basically gets blackballed for the most part. All right. Leading towards WrestleMania 3, though, Vince wanted to make it bigger and bigger and bigger, which he ended up finding the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit. Now, the number of
Home of the Lions.
Former home of the Detroit Lions. Now, the number apparently for that is very, very skewed. I understand. But Vince needed something very big. Andre the Giant was basically retired at this point, for the most part.
He was doing The Princess
He was
Bride.
doing Princess Bride, which, by the way, is one of the best movies ever.
I love The Princess Bride.
One of my favorite. I still watch anytime I see it on TV. I still watch it. It's one of my favorites. Um,
And to be honest, it's not even for Andre the Giant either.
no, it's just a great movie. Got everything in it. But Andre needed back surgery. Now, kind of like, despite how Vince was, or how the perception of Vince is, he paid for Andre the Giant's back surgery.
Yeah.
Like, I understand a lot of like the way the perception of Vince is, and I understand that completely, and that's fine. But he does have a certain point where he does take care of a lot of people. He has. Now, some of it has been in very greasy ways, but if you look at stuff he did with, for Undertaker, for Andre the Giant, um, Tom Pritchard is one person, especially in episode 6. We'll touch on it quickly right now. Bruce Pritchard.
Yeah.
His wife was going battling cancer, and Vince paid for everything with all the best doctors, all he could find. And I understand Pritchard's loyalty with him. So Vince
was loyal to people who were loyal to him.
Yes.
That's why, like, he's taking care of guys like Taker, Cena,
Yeah.
And that's why, like, when all this, Janelle Grant stuff came up this past winter, which we'll get into in the last episode, a lot of guys were, like, hesitant.
Very true. Like, even
they were kind of hesitant because
like, I'm not going to ask that.
They don't know that side of Vince, and like, so like all of his top guys, Vince has always been kind of like a father figure too.
It's one of those things too, where like, it's I guess certain people are a small group of folks that he really takes care of, certain people. But we'll get a lot more of that in 5 and 6. So we ended up doing the thing for Andre the Giant. Word was Andre was never going to actually. Well, nobody knew what Andre was going to do at WrestleMania 3. WrestleMania 3 was either going to make Hulk Hogan even more or ruin the whole thing. Because Andre never told Hogan if he was going to kick out or not. Yeah. And that word the hell of Hogan. Andre was a consummate professional. He'll do the job.
Yep.
And he did. But Andre's back was completely messed up at that point. It really was. So after that was done, obviously WrestleMania starts going on. You go WrestleMania 4, you go to 5. They didn't really talk about 4 or 5 or 6. Actually, you notice too, they didn't really talk Ultimate Warrior at all in this, right?
The only time they bring up Warrior is when they talk WrestleMania 6, which I believe is in episode 3.
But they didn't really mention much about 6 at all. There wasn't much else in there about it. There wasn't not a lot about 6 at all.
No, you're right. But so the thing I want to touch on about like the WrestleMania attendance.
Yeah.
So apparently 93,000 is the total amount of people that were in the building that night.
Yeah.
When it comes to paid attendance, it's somewhere around 79 to 80 something, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
We're never going to get the true number of it.
To be honest, does it really matter that much? Does it really matter at this point? Probably not.
No, it doesn't. It's no different than when people were arguing about the AEW All-In figure from last year.
Yeah. Who cares? It was a big show. It was a great show. Who cares? But this starts leading into the steroid trial.
Which started because Phil Mushnick was working with the FBI about a doctor. I forgot the doctor's name.
Zahorian.
That's it.
He's now a urologist.
Oh, really?
Interesting. I just kind of looked it up. That's funny. Zahorian, who was at the time the medical staff part for the WWE or WWF at the time. Now, Vince, I completely forgot this too. That Vince started his own bodybuilding competition because he was always a big fan of bodybuilding and all this stuff. So he started his own bodybuilding competition, right? To rival, the Olympia. Never happened. Never worked out well. Lost a lot of
Well,
money.
that's because he launched this. He launched this like literally right as the feds
Steroids.
were looking
Yeah.
to indict him for the steroid stuff.
Now, anybody who knows bodybuilding, look, I follow bodybuilding. I kind of do it myself, and now I'm not on any gear, but if you want to win the Olympia in certain categories, you're on gear and everyone knows it. Simple as that, right? I mean, look at this. You get to the steroid trial where it starts getting things. Hogan at this point, because this is like they go through WrestleMania 7. Hogan
Goes
ends up,
goes on Arsenio Hall and blatantly lies.
yeah, Arnold City Hall of all things, blatantly lies, says he's never taken steroids. And to be
Yeah,
honest, with you, right at this point, too, Hogan is kind of on like slowly on his ending. This is where they start kind of transitioning away from Hogan,
yeah.
and Hogan ends up leaving after WrestleMania 7 with everything that happened. Phil Munchik, though, honestly hates it, man. He was the informant. But in between this stuff here, the Ring Boy scandal starts.
Oh,
This is
okay.
involving this is where the
So,
scandal
okay,
starts.
yeah. So,
And the Rita Moore scandal, who's a female referee.
yeah, Rita Chatterton.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what I understand about both cases.
Yeah.
Apparently, there were two guys that would hire teenagers locally,
One was a ring announcer and one was Pete Garvin, I think his name was.
something like that.
And then
Um,
Pat Patterson to a degree, but never actually
so
never
yeah,
touched.
so three of them took the fall for this,
Yeah.
including Pat,
Mhm.
but everyone under the sun has
Defended Pat.
defended Pat. The other two, not so much.
Yeah, yeah, they're basically thrown right under the bus.
But anyways, there was a lot of abuse towards these teenage boys.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there was a lot of abuse towards. Well, I mean, first of all, they were underage.
Yeah.
Second of all, they were probably coerced.
Yep.
Um, and some very dark stuff. Eventually, they did settle out of court with one of the guys.
Yeah.
Um, and again, like Pat was brought back like within 6 months.
Yeah, he was back within 6 months. He was basically kind of cleared of everything, but
Right.
the
The Rita Chatterton thing.
yeah, that got settled out of court too. A lot of stuff seemed to get settled out of court.
I think this is why in this day and age, with everything going on right now,
Yeah.
I think this is why a lot of people have a hard time kind of believing Vince's innocence in this,
Yeah.
because there is several examples and it starts with this.
Yeah. This is the first one here.
The story goes,
She was a referee.
yes, she was a referee, but the story goes one night in New York, they were in a limo and Vince forced himself on her.
Surprise, surprise.
Right. And, you know, she had a hard time with people believing her.
Keep
You
in
know,
mind, folks, this is also before the whole so-called Mr. McMahon character. Anyway.
right. So I, again, it's not up to us
No.
to determine what happened, what didn't happen.
No.
All we can do is interpret the information that we have.
Yep.
And kind of with current context, I would believe Rita's side over. And here's the thing: when Vince was asked about it, his answer was very off-putting. So when he was asked about this, he basically dismisses it in a sense of, even if I did those things, the statute of limitations on them would have ran out.
Yeah.
So that's not vehemently denying it.
No.
That's not admitting to it,
No.
but it's kind of in a gray area in between.
And that there, folks, that was basically the first 2 episodes of the
Yeah.
Vince McMahon documentary. It ends with that, and it starts with the Wendy Richter, who was first foreshadowed the Bret Hart screw job, which led into the Monday Night Wars.
And we'll get into
all
all we're going to get into all that in the next episode. So
and that was TA Wrestling for that. Quickly take us out of here too, and we'll get back to you guys with the next
tomorrow.
episode of 3 and 4 tomorrow.
Yeah. So until then, thank you for listening. Go find us on YouTube, DA Wrestling. You can find us on Spotify, Podbean, also at DA Wrestling. Go find the show DA Sports Podcast on Instagram, DA Sports Pod on Twitter. He's a Purcell 1982 on Twitter or Instagram. That's the one. Andrew DA Sports on TikTok. I'm D Lines 1981 on Twitter, and we'll catch you down the road.